Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk, Secrets, Lies, and Half-Truths in Cyber Defense. My name is Mark Orlando, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all virtually at BSides Charlotte to give a talk that I'm quite passionate about. Hopefully that'll come through. We have a lot to discuss. Really quick about me, I have 21 years experience, give or take, in cyber defense, who's counting. I've been a SOC analyst, I've been a security manager, I've been an executive. Today, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a cyber defense company called Bionic. I'm also a certified instructor and course author at the SANS Institute. I teach SEC 450, which is Blue Team Fundamentals and Security Operations, and I co-authored Management 551, which is a class on building and leading SOC teams. So working in security operations, supporting cyber defense as an executive, a manager, as an analyst, as a defender, something that I've done for many years now. And I wanted to give this talk at what I believe is a fantastic event for defenders and security folks, of all different disciplines. Is I feel like as a manager, as a consultant, as a practitioner, we're investing a lot, arguably more than we ever have in cyber defense. But I don't feel like we're improving at the rate that we're making investments. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think we are getting better, but I think we still have a long ways to go. So I wanted to give this talk basically because I wanted to be the well actually guy who just sits in a meeting and trolls everybody else and tries to tear down the lies and the half-truths that we often tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better, when I take all of those things, really annoying things, put them into a talk, give it virtually where no one can throw things at me or punch me in the face for being annoying, and really try to be honest with ourselves about some of these lies and some of these things that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better, but which aren't quite as effective as we like to believe they are. I don't know how I got hacked. I had my risk matrix fully completed and fully color-coded. I have no idea why we could have been breached, right? We're going to tear some of those things down just a tiny little bit in this talk. More specifically, what we'll cover some common myths, truths in security, mostly in operations, because that's my background. Reasons why we get some of these things wrong, even when we feel like we're doing them right and we're doing the right things. We'll talk about some ways to get to ground truth. We don't want to throw all of these things out entirely. There may be some more effective ways that we can look at what we're doing. We can improve the things that we're doing, do new things, right, in a better way to get to some measurable and repeatable results for building out, executing, and managing our cyber defense. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start off by going over some of the lies we tell and secrets we keep. And I think to some extent, these aren't necessarily secrets, or rather they're poorly kept secrets in our industry. The first deals with teamwork. We have an effective team. I've hired really smart people, so obviously they're making the right decisions, they're doing the right things. When it comes to technology, we've spent so much. In fact, I made it a point to walk the expo floor at RSA, and I bought one of every single shiny blinky box they have. So surely we're in a good shape from a technology perspective, right? And surely those things work. From a metrics perspective, well, I have comprehensive metrics that I'm tracking. I'm measuring my security. I'm doing assessments on a regular basis. I'm collecting numbers and figures and charts. So I'll know when security is not working as I intend for it to work. Oh, those alerts, yeah, that's just noise. We just acknowledge those and move on. We don't really pay attention to those. But otherwise, I will know when I miss something or where something isn't working as it should, right? So in case you haven't picked up on my sarcasm, there are some issues here in how we think about technology. in cyber defense, how we think about our teams and how they collaborate and work together, how we measure and track the work that we're doing on a daily basis. So let's dig into some of those, starting with teamwork. Are you an effective team? Does anyone get this meme? One of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time, Oblivion. It's awesome. You should check it out. But are we truly an effective team? Having an effective team doesn't start and end with having smart, capable people, throwing them together and just kind of hoping that teamwork happens. In a lot of cases, it does happen because we're all relatively smart, capable individuals. At least all of us here are, right? I don't know about other people, but we definitely are. Having really solid teamwork, having spaces where we can share ideas and we can share skills kind of freely. We can address gaps in each other's knowledge, right? That kind of effective collaboration, it requires deliberate effort. It doesn't just happen organically on its own. Or rather, those team relationships don't form in a way that maximizes what's possible. So just because I'm smart and you're smart and maybe we're doing good work individually doesn't necessarily mean that our team is as effective as it could be. In fact, we're much more likely to go off track unless there is some deliberate effort and some intentionality in how our working relationships, how our teams are built and cultivated, meaning how we train together, how we track our interactions, how we govern our communications. These things have to be deliberate. It requires work. Teamwork must be measured. We have to measure teamwork. How do you measure teamwork? It seems kind of weird. Just as we would capture metrics on the alerts that we're investigating, on the cases we're opening, on the response that we're executing, we need to capture metrics on team interactions. Remember, incident response, cyber defense, it's very much a team sport. And I could be the most capable responder, capable analyst in the entire organization. I'm still not going to be able to fully contain, eradicate, recover from an incident all by myself. I'm going to rely on other members of my team. My team is going to rely on other groups and other functions within the organization to make changes, right, contain the damage, recover those systems to normal working order. So we have to plan, track, and measure those interactions and that collaboration to make sure that it's happening as smoothly as it needs to in those crisis situations. Finally, remember, teamwork isn't task work. Just because individuals are really good at doing certain tasks by themselves, again, doesn't mean that the team is going to come together and gel and that those individuals who are great individual contributors are also going to be good teammates. I know this comes as a shock to all of you that really smart, capable, technical people don't always work really well as part of a group. I know, talking about other people, not us, okay? Certainly other people. Why does this happen? Why does this require deliberate focus, especially in cybersecurity and cyber defense? Let me clue you in on kind of a not so secret in security teams. One, there's a lot of what we call egocentrism in cybersecurity. Okay? Not talking about being egotistical, that's a different thing. Surely not a problem in our industry, right? But egocentrism, this feeling that I'm capable, I'm smart, I can handle this on my own. I'm going to tackle this investigation by myself. I'm going to respond to this incident by myself. There's a lot of that going on. And oftentimes our teams are kind of set up to encourage that mentality. How many times have you been in an investigation or an incident response and you've got that really capable, really knowledgeable teammate that jumps in and starts running the entire effort? Do you find that you're able to keep up and collaborate effectively with that person? Or do you kind of step away, say, oh, so-and-so's got it. Okay, they're always the one that kind of drives these things. So I'm just going to step back. I don't know as much as they do. I can't do what they can do. And we're just going to let them kind of run with it because they're the loudest voice in the room. Okay, a lot of egocentrism in security. Cybersecurity is a complex set of problems, really complex ecosystem, complex set of problems. No one person is going to have all of the knowledge share, the mind share required to solve all elements of those problems. Okay, if I have a problem in my cloud environment, I, as a security analyst or as a system administrator or as a responder or an engineer, requires a team coming together in order to effectively remediate that issue. And to that point, incident response cybersecurity consists of these multi-team systems. It's not just one team, it's multiple different teams that have to work together effectively to execute that effective defense. Okay? These different issues, these different problems intersect and result in ineffective teams. Ineffective teams. So we have to address these issues. We want to incentivize and motivate solid, effective teamwork. We want to create psychological safety within our teams. If someone disagrees with the way that we're doing something, as something to bring into the process, we want to create an environment where those new ideas and those sometimes conflicting perspectives are welcome and they're part of the process. In doing that, we want to cultivate autonomy, belonging, competence. People want to feel confident that they're able to add to the discussion, be an effective and productive part of the team. So how can we do this? One of the things that we can do in a very tactical sort of way to track and measure the collaboration that's happening is putting together something like this. This is a multi-team system diagram. It's how we can plan and track collaboration not only within our own team, but between our teams and other teams in our incident response organization. This comes from some research done by Dr. Daniel Shore, who's a behavioral scientist and a founding member of a firm called Let's We Can. They're focused on teamwork and training and a lot of the things that I'm talking about here. Right? But Dr. Shore and his team created this model essentially as a very simple way to identify and track relationships and team interaction, in this case, during security incidents. So you can see here in this diagram, we have a few different functional groups. We have our watch team, our threat intelligence team, engineering team, and so forth. And we're using these arrows to track how much interaction happens between these teams in these crisis scenarios. So for example, here, the watch team and the engineering team always work together very closely and very often during incidents. The watch team and the intel team and the IR team also work pretty often together. The intel team and the PR communications team, maybe not so much, but there needs to be some kind of relationship, some kind of contact there. So we can map out these relationships and these interactions, and we can use this to guide how often these teams train together. What kind of trust needs to be built within these teams? What kind of cross-training we need to do? Maybe what kind of shadowing we need to do between these teams? Do our processes and our tools support this really busy high level of interaction between these teams that we've mapped out here? So again, just a simple, useful way to deliberately plan out collaboration and not just tell yourself that you think the teams are working well together, when in reality, you have no idea, right? We want to get to ground truth on that. This is a good way to start down that path. We can also use frameworks like the NICE framework developed by NIST and constituents of the federal government to define job roles, define competencies, tasks, knowledge, and skills required for those job roles. Essentially coming up with a set of building blocks to say, you know what, it's not enough just to hire really smart, capable people. I've seen way too many really smart, capable people put into roles that don't match their skill set, don't match their career goals, right? What they're interested in, what they want to do. So we can use models like the NICE framework to write specific, objective, repeatable role descriptions with very clear knowledge and skill statements. You have to know you have to be able to do these things. Here's how it's going to translate into doing the actual work. to make sure that our candidates, our people, our talent, and the roles that they're filling, the work that they're doing, are well aligned. Nice framework. If you're less familiar with it, I put a link in this slide to the NIST publication that describes it. Really, really great resource, not only for writing those objective, comprehensive role descriptions, also really good for building training plans. So if you have folks on your team or you yourself feel like you're lacking specific knowledge or certain skills, technical skills to do the job effectively, we can identify those gaps, come up with training solutions or training plans to help, as opposed to simply saying, I'm an okay analyst, but I think I could really be a much better SOC analyst if I, take that underwater basket weaving training class, because that really interests me. Maybe not. But by using standard frameworks like NICE, we can make sure that those requirements and the requirements of the job, what you really want to do, what the job requires you to do, that those are all lined up. And again, we're not just hoping that by throwing smart people at the problem, things will magically get solved and our cyber defense ultimately becomes more effective. Very little deliberate effort. So let's talk truth here about some technology, right? Technology. Surely there are no half-truths or lies about technology in our sector, right? Or in our industry. The truth about technology is that tools won't stop a skilled adversary. If you think Uber did not purchase any security infrastructure or security tools, probably wouldn't want to place money on that bet. Your security, much like their security, will be defeated by poor IT governance, creative adversaries who have anticipated how you're defending the environment or not defending it, and they're going to exploit those weaknesses, right? It's not just about having that fancy blinky box. In fact, sometimes having the fancy blinky box can put you in a really bad spot where you think your security is a lot better than it really is. We invest in tools because it's easier than IT governance. Real talk, folks. Eliminating rogue IT or shadow IT, and that stuff's hard. Can't I just buy a security tool instead, right? Now, maybe that's a little bit unfair, but that is the prevailing mindset in a lot of organizations that haven't yet tackled many of these fundamental governance issues, but think that because they've invested in security infrastructure and security tools, they're solving a lot of their problems. And as we know, as we've recently seen, that just isn't the case. So what do we do about that? How can we be a little bit more honest with ourselves, cut through some of those half-truths, get technology that really works for us? Well, first off, technology starts and ends with requirements, right? We want to have a plan for our technology. Our tools should enable our teams to fulfill their charter, meet the requirements of the organization. We don't start with a fancy tool and then figure out how we can use it, build our processes around that. No, we have a need. We have a thing that we're trying to do, right? Detect threats at the network layer, detect threats, post-exploitation activities at the endpoint. What technology lets us do that more effectively and in a scalable way? We have to keep an eye on our capacity. You can have 10 of the best tools in the world. If you only have staff to monitor and manage 3 of those tools, you're oversubscribed. You have a capacity problem. You're not going to be able to take full advantage of the technology that you're buying if you don't have the capacity to operate it. Finally, when it comes to introducing new technology, I'm a huge fan of frameworks and processes. I'm a manager after all. We want to adopt a repeatable process for introducing new technology. MITRE's Analysis of Alternatives, or AOA process, I've put a link here in this slide, really, really great process for that. It comes down to identifying your requirements or the opportunity, identifying what are the things that my tools need to do to meet those requirements. Let me look at multiple different tools that potentially check the boxes on that criteria, compare, pick the best one. That's it. That's it. We can also take some lessons from other disciplines into security. Love doing this. There's been some really great writing in the last couple of years by Anton Chavakin and some other folks at Google and other places about taking lessons and approaches from site reliability engineering, SRE, applying some of those principles and some of those techniques in cybersecurity. A lot of this comes down to adopting an engineering first mindset in security with an eye towards making permanent improvements. So tell me if you've heard this one before. I stand up a SOC. I buy a bunch of tools. I slam them in there. I hire a bunch of people. Tools make noise. People handle the noise. And that just goes on in perpetuity. And the people get burned out along the way. And guess what I do? I bring in more people. They get burned out. Guess what I do then? Bring in more people. You see where I'm going with this? We want to think about what improvements we can make and solve what we can, reduce those manual operations. There's some really good research there. If you search for Google SRE, if you look at Anton Chavakin's blog posts on this topic, there's lots of really good write-ups there on kind of the life cycle of automation, which I've shown here in this slide, and some of those SRE principles that we can bring into cybersecurity, apply with our technology, eliminate some of that burnout repetitive work. Some of the things that we all kind of know are problems with some of our technology, but we just sort of accept it. We accept that we're just going to have to look at the same alerts ad nauseum to infinity forever until we leave that job or get promoted out. That's really not the way it should be, right? Let's talk about metrics for a bit. I'll be kind and say there are some half-truths in security metrics, and I want you to take a look at these and let me know if any of these look familiar, right? That's rhetorical because this is a pre-recorded talk, and of course, you can let me know in the Discord where present Mark is currently monitoring and answering questions. I'm past Mark speaking to you now, okay? Look at these metrics, see if any of them look familiar. For detected attacks, we're tracking how many alerts our tools have generated, how many incidents our tools have detected. When it comes to analyst productivity, we're looking at number of tickets opened, how fast those tickets get closed, the number of projects that we're working on. Right? It kind of shows our productivity level. When it comes to vulnerabilities, we're prioritizing patches based on CVSS score of those vulnerabilities. When it comes to risk measurement, we've got risk matrices where we're tracking attack impact versus likelihood, coming up with some calculations there. Well, this all seems fine, right? Maybe, maybe not. Bottom line is security metrics are hard. Who knew? Think about our good friend, the risk matrix, which I'm going to beat up on a little bit right now. Fair warning. Common mistakes here that we're making. Type errors, right? And that is something that is specific to the risk matrix. I want you all to come along on a journey with me as we walk through these values. We express likelihood as a scale of very likely, likely, possible, unlikely, etc. And we express impact as none or negligible, minor, moderate, severe, significant, etc. Right? So these are qualitative measures, and we gauge these measures as low, moderate, high, red, yellow, green. These are not quantitative measures. These are labels. They're ordinals and nominals that we're using to basically sort things into buckets. It's not true quantitative risk measurement. We're saying, well, this thing is less likely to happen, and if it does, it's majorly impactful. What even does that mean? The way that I assess that is going to be different than the way you assess that, It's not very objective. And the problem really comes into play when we take what we assess for severe and we multiply that by very likely to get an overall risk of high. So we've basically taken an ordinal, low, medium, high, and we've multiplied that by another ordinal. What is a high times a low? I don't know. What's a yellow times a green? That math can't meaningfully be done. So the bottom line here is we're taking highly subjective measures, highly subjective classifications. We're doing meaningless math with them, and we think that that gets us to a meaningful designation for what the risk is. And unfortunately, things just don't really work that way. Right? So this is what's called a type error. We're applying numeric labels. We're just assigning numbers randomly to nominal or ordinal classifications, and then we're trying to do computations based on that. It can't meaningfully be done. Another challenge that we often have when it comes to security metrics is this phenomenon called metrics fixation, where we use metrics and numbers and data as a replacement for judgment and experience, talent. We'll talk about why this happens here. How we can avoid those type errors that I just described using the risk matrix. One, use the right measurement scale. If you want to have data, if you want to have interval or ratio values, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc., design your metric that way from the beginning. Don't simply assign numbers because you think that it makes the metric sound more scientific. It doesn't work. If you are using ordinals like high, medium, low, red, yellow, green, whatever, red, yellow, green would be nominal, right? If you're using those kinds of measures where there aren't numbers involved, that's fine. Drop the numbers. Maybe create a mapping that says, if this is a low likelihood, right, then do this. Don't throw numbers in there and complicate things and try to add math. Okay? It just doesn't work. Option 3, shift to true quantitative analysis. There's a fantastic book, which I'll reference at the end of the slide presentation, how to measure anything in cybersecurity risk or everything in cybersecurity risk. Really fantastic reference for doing true quantitative analysis of cybersecurity risk. Highly recommend check that out. How can we avoid this concept of metrics fixation, where we essentially use numbers as a replacement for judgment? Everything has to satisfy the numbers. It's a replacement for essentially effective management. Think about how you're using metrics in your teams today. Are those metrics, how many alerts you looked at, how fast you were, how fast you were on your incident response, okay? Are those being used as a diagnostic tool for practitioners, or are they being used to assess penalties or incentives? There are reams of research that point to any time metrics are used as the basis for a penalty or incentive, guess what's going to happen? People are going to game the system. And there are countless examples of this, from higher education to law enforcement to cybersecurity. Absolutely. There's a great book on this, which I'll reference at the end of the deck, at the end of the talk here. Get inputs from the right people. Your practitioners, your defenders are only going to be on board. They're going to be open to feedback if they really believe in the metrics, how they're being measured. And then finally, recognize the limits of data. We can't use metrics and data for everything. Okay? So metrics should inform judgment. They should demand judgment. They shouldn't replace judgment. Why do we keep making these mistakes? If these are, not so secrets in cybersecurity, why do we keep doing these things over and over and over again? In some cases, for over a decade, we've been doing these things in cyber defense. Well, first off, it's easy to assume that correlation is causation. If there are two things that seem kind of related, may or may not be related, we have what sounds like a really bad, vulnerability, and it's got a high CVSS score, we automatically assume that maybe we have to prioritize that for patching before everything else. And we assume that there's a causal relationship there where maybe there isn't one. The mere exposure effect, risk matrix. We see something over and over again. We assume that that is just the right way to do it, when really maybe not quite as meaningful as we think it is. Numbers make us feel safe and scientific. They imply objectivity when maybe there isn't any. Finally, metrics can sometimes be an easy button in situations where we don't have domain expertise or we don't have a lot of experience. Has anyone ever been in a situation where you have a manager or an executive who's brand new, doesn't have a lot of history or background, maybe doesn't have domain expertise. What's the first thing they want to do? Well, I want to look at the numbers. I want to make some decisions, change some things. Show me, how many incidents we've opened or how many vulnerabilities that we've patched, right? I just want to see the numbers. I'll make decisions based on that. That is an easy button in cognitively challenging situations where it's really tough to get up to speed or to get all the insights we need. Sometimes metrics, unfortunately, become that easy button. And it's not just for managers and executives, right? We all do it, but we should. So how do we get on a path to more honest measurement? First, we start with top-down alignment. So think about our goals and our objectives for the security team. What services are we offering to the organization? What results do we need to see to know whether or not we're successful as a security team? Are we meeting our commitments? We gather our metrics using consistent measurement without subjective criteria, preferably in some cheap, automated or semi-automated way. Use that data as an indicator of how things are working, not as a method of control. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to use judgment. We're gonna have to manage things. You can't just rely only on the data. Doesn't tell the entire story in all cases. Finally, any metrics that we're using, that we're tracking for our teams, have to be expressed with at least one unit of measure. Percentage, hours, dollars. That is the path to true quantitative risk assessment and not just, feels like that's a high. Feels like it's moderately likely. Maybe kind of impactful, right? That's not particularly useful. One example of coming up with meaningful metrics, or one approach, is the goal question metric process, or GQM. It's pioneered originally in software development projects. Essentially, it is a way to come up with useful metrics that are traceable to high-level goals or objectives. And here's how this works. Let's say one of the goals of your security team is minimizing the impacts of supply chain attacks. So we want to come up with metrics that tell us whether or not we are, in fact, minimizing the impact of supply chain attacks. So how do we do that? First, we take that goal, we ask clarifying questions about that goal. Try to get to something very specific and measurable. First off, how do we define supply chain attack? Are we talking about alerts of a certain type? Are we talking about new vulnerabilities or weaknesses that fall within a certain kind of classification? Do we have telemetry? Do we have data and visibility to monitor for these kinds of threats? What does that look like? When we fail to minimize the impact of supply chain attacks, what does that look like? Is there data, or is there some tool or some report where I can identify those failures, measure how often those occur? So some metrics that answer these questions. Number of insertion attacks, third-party compromises, right? Those are supply chain attack types, tracked in our incident management system. That is a measurable, specific data point that I can capture. What is the completion rate of my third-party attestations? So it's not just about technical data. Maybe I track third-party, questionnaires, how I'm kind of tracking that third-party supply chain risk. The time to contain supply chain attacks, third-party compromises based on what's in my incident management system. So now I've got 3 data points, 3 metrics I can use, answer my follow-up questions that tell me whether or not I'm achieving that goal, minimizing the impacts of supply chain attacks. Taking this a little bit further, do we have roles on our team? Think about the teamwork that we talked about, right? The staffing we talked about. Cutting through some of that noise. Do we have roles, skills, knowledge required to identify and investigate those supply chain attacks? Do we even know a supply chain attack when we see it? Do we require some additional training to fill those gaps? Make sure we know what we're looking for. Do our tools and our telemetry enable us to identify and investigate these kinds of compromises? Are we using those supply chain metrics to support our judgment, or are we using them as a replacement for our judgment? Are they helping us actually improve? That's really the fundamental question here. Again, this is the path to more honest metrics. Tying it all together, think about why your security team exists. Start with those high-level goals. And by the way, the goals are not operate our SIM, open tickets. Those are not goals. What are you doing for the organization to enable it to operate free from cyber attack or major outages due to cyber attack? Right? Start with those high-level security goals. Ask clarifying questions to understand what success looks like, and then make sure that the roles of your team, the tools you have, the processes that you've developed, make sure those all support those objectives. Make sure the team is working together effectively. Map out and track how your team works together internally and with other teams in this larger multi-team system. Create one of those MTS interaction diagrams. Use those maps to train, to communicate, build trust. Make sure that teamwork is happening effectively. Do your tools meet your requirements? Are they really doing the thing that you need that tool to do for you? Or are they just creating more busy work, eating up your capacity without really solving any problems? Finally, in your metrics, for those of you manager, leader types out there, do you have the right metrics? Are you using them to diagnose problems, to drive improvements? Or are you simply racking up a bunch of meaningless data to use as a replacement for good judgment, good management? That's how we bring some of these things together. In summary, look, we're getting much better at cyber defense. By any number of measures, we're getting better, but we still have to be honest about systemic failures, ineffective approaches, things that aren't really working for us. Keeping requirements in mind, starting and ending with requirements. When you're staffing security, when you're implementing new technology, when you're measuring success, it's absolutely critical. Do use existing models and frameworks and processes to add transparency and consistency, but don't rely on faulty, deceptive, less than honest approaches that obscure, hide those systemic issues or those bottlenecks. Some references for some of the things that I've covered in this talk. Again, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. Fantastic book by Douglas Hubbard, Richard Seierson, The Tyranny of Metrics. Really short, kind of quick read by Jerry Mueller. A really great book on kind of misuses and unintended consequences of using data, not specific to security, but I think is very relevant for security. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug Management 551, which goes into a lot of these topics in far more detail than I've done here, written by myself and John Hubbard. With that, I want to thank you all very much for attending my talk. Of course, I want to thank the BSides team for having me back again to do this talk. If you have any questions or any comments, I've been in the Discord channel, hopefully responding to those by now, but certainly willing and happy to talk about more of this stuff in detail there. So please feel free to reach out, and thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the show.